I had a great conversation with Jared Schrieber. He was the founder and CEO of InfoScout. InfoScout had a really cool story because they grew a business ahead of its time. They managed to secure venture capital backing. They had an exit, and then they had an even bigger exit recently where Vista Equity Partners was able to roll up InfoScout and another business, turn it into Numerator, and sell it for $1.5 billion. I really look forward to you listening to Jared's story, and I'm glad that I was able to unpack some of the lessons that he learned about everything from building a valuable data asset to building incredible culture internally to the power of relying on family when you're building a startup. So without further ado, here's Jared to tell us all about his adventures over the last 10 years. So in a way, InfoScout was ahead of its time, but you also managed to raise venture capital, which is kind of rare for businesses of that time and stage in this space. And you managed to have a very good exit, which a lot of folks, that built data sets, didn't get to. They're still building those businesses.
We almost didn't.
And so I didn't know that, but I want to hear the whole story. So I'm going to shut up and let you tell me how this all came together, and even maybe start with what you were doing before.
Yeah, I think that's actually very relevant and important. So I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur and start my own company, but didn't quite have the right idea yet. So I figured the next best thing was to join a set of founders who had success together before and were building something that was kind of relevant to me in my space, and so I joined a company at the time. It was called T3CI, and it was the early leader in RFID analytics in 2004-5 type timeframe. And this is when RFID was hot. I mean, it was hot. It was sexy. Sure. RFID tags were going to be on everything.
I was an RFID analyst for like one summer.
The only summer that it mattered.
Exactly. It was like 04, 05 or something.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So look, what was amazing is these founders had worked together before, taking a software company public. Now they were working together again, and they already had Procter & Gamble and Kraft and Johnson & Johnson and Unilever and Walmart willing to take all of the RFID data from their pilots, share it with this company, T3CI, this startup that would do all kinds of analytics and tell them what the heck was going on in their supply chain and their store operations and inventory flows and you name it. And I love working with data, very simply. And so I convinced these founders to take me on. Like, they didn't have a position that made sense. I just told them they needed me, and sure enough. So anyway,
where were you living at the time?
I was in Atlanta with Teradata, and kind of picking up sales, marketing, biz dev, go-to-market experience that I didn't have from my Intel days, where I was building tools and systems internal to Intel. And so, kind of getting a complementary skill set there in the software industry, knowing that that's where I want to go, but and then moving towards the entrepreneurial startup world and picking up that experience with T3CI. Anyway, long story short, RFID was a scam. I mean, it was
good for easy pass.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are use cases where it could make a lot of sense, and sadly, the way that they tried to deploy it by putting tags on every single case and use it almost as an accounting method for inventory flows.
Walmart did a decent job with it.
They did, but it never had a chance. I mean, we got all of that data, all of the Walmart generated data we were analyzing. And the read rates.
Every pair of jeans that was leaving the store.
You got it. And every can of Campbell's soup. But the problem was the read rates weren't there to be able to get an accurate inventory assessment of product being received to the store, product going from the back room to the front. It just wasn't going to work. But we had all of the point of sale and inventory data to match with it. And we started going, how can we take some of the learnings of what we can see from RFID and see if we can detect them just from the point of sale and inventory data? And we started building out some amazing algorithms to detect out of stocks at the shelf in a way that nobody had ever done before. Some pretty advanced algorithms to do that, and coming up with root causes of out of stocks and alerts and ways to solve them without a lot of people's involvements and sending people to stores. So we pivoted the business, and that was fun. It was a challenge. It was fun. We changed the name to Retail Solutions. We convinced retailers to share with us their point of sale and inventory data, and then we built software systems that allowed the brands that sold products through those retailers to have access to the same visibility and the same set of tools with the retailer to manage retail execution of what should the assortment of products be, what should pricing be, what promotions did they run, what's the forecast of demand, how do we replenish, and so we built basically data-driven collaborative tools between retailers and the brands who sold products for them, and we grew it from 0 to 60 million pretty quickly. But I also felt like the market size wasn't much bigger, and so since I wasn't a founder, after 6 years of that, I was looking for kind of my own opportunity. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I saw is my clients, Nestle, Procter & Gamble, would come to me at Retail Solutions and say, hey, this promotion that we're running at Target, we can see the sales lift, but we don't know if it's the same consumer stocking up their baskets and they're just buying it on the cheap and stuffing their pantry, or if we're reaching new consumers as a result of this promotion who end up ongoing buying the product more. And we don't know if this Target promotion is stealing demand from Walmart and Walgreens, or if it's generating new demand for our products. So net, we don't know if the promotion's good or not, just looking at retail point of sale data. And I'm like, well, why don't they use Nielsen or somebody else? And I realized they were, but it's just shit. The sample sizes were too small of the Nielsen national panel to be able to measure the effects of a single promotion at a Target. So the sample size was too small. Sure. So I started kind of researching the problem a little bit. And at this time, smartphone adoption was picking up, where you had 35% of American households with smartphones, but most of Europeans already had smartphones. And I said, Nielsen has this huge clunky device that they send into people's homes. And those people have to plug into their router and take every grocery item they buy and scan that item and use a clunky interface to thumb in the price that they paid and a whole bunch of the regular price, the promotion price, and other things. It's no wonder so few people do this, and the data quality is garbage, because the whole experience of participating is terrible. And so I thought, with smartphones, maybe we could appify and gamify the experience a little bit. And instead of scanning every product, what if you could just take a picture or receipt? And then we did the heavy lifting and figuring out what product you bought at what price off of the image of the receipt. And so that was the whole concept behind InfoScout, is that we were going to create fun, engaging mobile apps that incentivize people to take pictures of their everyday shopping receipts, no matter where they shopped or what they bought. And then we would use computer vision and crowdsourcing at scale, and then some machine learning on the back end to figure out what products they bought, and then build a massive database that tracked all consumer purchase behavior across all retail, across all product categories, to understand loyalty, response to promotion, response to advertising, response to new item introductions, trial and repeat, and do it at a scale that Nielsen could never get to with their legacy approach. And that's really what we did.
That's awesome. So I can take this in so many directions, but the direction that shows up for me is I still see this business being pitched today. So why is this business still being pitched today? And not just being pitched, but Iconic invested in one that we looked at like a 1 point something billion valuation out of the Midwest that has a ton of a captive audience around housewives and stuff.
Yeah, yep. You've got companies like Ibotta and Fetch Rewards and
Fetch Rewards. That's the one. So we saw Fetch Rewards early, and I didn't understand I was like, yeah, this exists, but it's existed. So why are people still building it?
So here's the funny thing. When we started InfoScout, we thought we could have the best of both worlds, our cake and eat it too, which was, we thought we could build a panel of people taking pictures of receipts that we could capture their data from and do all kinds of market measurement, market research, and monetize the data side. And we thought we could, at the same time, incentivize these people to buy products like the next generation of coupons. Instead of cutting a coupon, you get an offer, you accept it, you go buy the product, you take a picture of the receipt, and you get some kind of rebate or refund into your account as a result of that. What we quickly learned is you can't do both. And the reason you can't do both is the market researchers won't trust the data if you're biasing the purchase behaviors of the people you're trying to observe and measure. What's that effect of, it's not the Hawthorne effect, where it was a market productivity study, and by actually overlooking the people doing the work, their behavior changed because they knew they were being observed. Right. And so. Oh,
yeah.
So. Which also works with like electrons and quantum particles. If you look at it as if it's a particle, it's a particle. If you look at it as a wave, it's a wave. But you can't find evidence of it being both.
As well as with the entire country of China.
Right. So in our case, in our industry, what we found is we can either observe shoppers or we can influence shoppers, and either ways are valid paths to monetization, but you can't do both. And so we chose, and I think truly dominated, the path of measurement, observe and measure.
Yeah.
And Ibotta and now Fetch Rewards have built really impressive businesses in terms of influencing behavior. And they keep saying they're going to get into the analytics and measurements, and they keep investing there. And every time they do, you look at where they're at 3 years later and you go, do you have a business there? Like, is it a viable business? Whereas they've got great businesses in terms of incentivizing shoppers to buy specific products at particular stores.
That makes sense to me. Okay, got it. So continuing on the journey, so this is what you bought and it scaled and it worked. Now, how did you scale it, both organically and through external forces like venture capital?
Yes. So we had a real chicken and the egg problem. We've got a B2B2C business, and those tend to have chicken and the egg problems. And the chicken and the egg, very simply put, was we needed a lot of consumers taking pictures of a lot of receipts to have enough data to have the brands interested in paying for that data. But to have the consumers, we had to have the money from the brands paying for the data to pay the consumers and to pay for the transcription, the receipts, and everything else. So basically, there's this virtuous cycle if you can get it going. But at the beginning, it's a chicken and the egg, which comes first? Like, how do you get a bunch of consumers collecting all that data if you don't have the money from the brands? Well, you can solve that with money. You can solve that with capital. Right?
Yeah, two-sided networks. You just incentivize people enough.
And to be honest, we just struggled raising venture capital with this business. We couldn't convince many venture capitalists just didn't believe that we would be able to get tens of thousands of people to take pictures of their everyday shopping receipts. Mm-hmm. Like they just couldn't imagine themselves doing it, and therefore they couldn't imagine anyone else across the country doing it.
That needs a turn, by the way, because that bias, it shows up so much in our industry.
Yeah, and I would ask them. I would say, do you know Box Tops for Education? And some of them had heard of it. I'm like, this is the number one school fundraising program in America, where people buy boxes of cereal, boxes of tissue, they cut out the labels, they take them to the school, they have to be stapled to a sheet and turned in. Do you know, that's a lot of work. The typical school only makes about $100 a year off that. Do you know how many box tops get collected every year and redeemed? It's hundreds of millions.
Holy crap.
Like, just because you wouldn't do it doesn't mean there's not a massive amount of people out there willing to do just a little bit for a donation to their kid's school, for example. So that's one of the things we tapped into. We said, what if instead of having to buy specific products, cut out the labels, collect them, have a school coordinator, bundle them all up, count them, staple them, send them in? What if anybody could download our Shopperoo app, select their school? It's already in there. They don't even have to register it. They just select it. They just start taking pictures of their receipts, no matter where they shopped or what they bought, and we make an instant donation to their kid's school. And sure enough, like this, we ended up getting thousands of schools on the platform encouraging parents to, hey, use Shopperoo to take pictures of receipts, and we get donations for it. So we tapped into the collective school fundraising, was one of our apps. And then we created an app called Receipt Hog, which was a Tamagotchi game where if you download the app, you adopt a virtual runts. You take pictures of receipts. It feeds the runts as it grows up to a wiener and a hog, and you're earning coins in a piggy bank along the way. And those coins you can end up redeeming for cash. So it's just gamified shopping rewards, no matter where you shop or what you buy. And so that's how we got the consumer side going. Fortunately, we ended up getting some angel investing that allowed us to prove it out enough that we very quickly, within 6 months, were capturing as much data as Nielsen from as many consumers. And then Bain Capital Ventures came along and said, okay, we believe you in terms of the value of this data, and based on your background, being able to sell this to the brands. Where a lot of VCs have been concerned is, could we get consumers to do this at a scale that mattered? And once we demonstrated a very nice steep curve in terms of that kind of adoption and retention to be able to get consumers to do this, then we were getting term sheets, whereas it took us a year to get there. It was really a painful slog to prove this out.
Was this still in Atlanta?
No, so it's funny. I had moved my family to Budapest, Hungary, where my wife was from, and we moved in with her in-laws and lowered our burn rate as a family. And I took one of my former employees from Retail Solutions who had already had some ventures of his own as my CTO. He was based in San Francisco. So I was in Budapest, he was in San Francisco. I'd fly out to San Francisco, sleep on his couch, and we'd work together for weeks at a time. And then I'd go back to Budapest where the family was staying with the in-laws. And, that's how we managed through a year without salary and being able to put our own money into building the initial product and acquiring the users and paying them to take pictures of receipts and those kind of things before we could get any angel or venture investment to cover it.
That's a true marriage. Your wife is an unsung hero, and her family.
Absolutely.
I love it. I know exactly that. That is my story. That's part of my story too. So someday I'll give you the value stream.
I love that.
That's exactly.
I love it.
Man. That's so cool, and I see why you're now back in Budapest. I think you've got some good muscle memory.
Right. That's
around that experience, and I'm sure that it doesn't hurt to be close to family. And
not at all. No, it's great actually.
Yeah. So the company growth. I don't want to minimize that part of the story, because once you got funding after the blog, it sounds like things started taking off. But I'm sure there were also some bumps. But how did you protect the uniqueness of the data, and maybe use that lens to talk about how you guys scaled?
Look, I think the uniqueness of the data, what we were finding is the typical Nielsen panelist was reporting 1.5 shopping trips a week because the whole process was so cumbersome. And even then, they weren't reporting all the products they bought. From those trips, they'd leave, big dog food, they leave out condoms. Why would I want to report I bought condoms? I'm leaving that out, So what we were seeing is people take pictures of the receipt, they're shopping 6-7 times a week. We're capturing from the same people 4 times as many shopping trips a week. And we're not missing the big bags of dog food that people don't want to carry into their house next to their router and scan, the bag of. And we were capturing e-commerce data as well, because we created integrations where we could read out e-commerce receipts automatically from inboxes and incentivize that. And Nielsen hadn't figured that out yet either. So we immediately had a differentiated data set, and it very quickly became much larger in terms of total number of transactions per week that we could measure, which gave us a sample size advantage and a speed of reading what was happening in the market much faster than Nielsen. In terms of protecting it, I think the key was we just had to make sure if we could create the most representative and scalably representative panel of what was going on in America, we were going to have a huge advantage in this market. So then it was just a question of how do we continue to build this in a way where we're not burning too much cash as we continue to build a bigger and bigger moat in terms of the size and representativeness of the data set that we have versus anyone else out there. And so that was just always a balancing act, because the challenge with a business like ours is, let's say we're spending $8 million a year on building this data asset in terms of acquiring consumers into the apps, incentivizing them for day in, day out, taking pictures of receipts, answering questions to surveys. You've got to incentivize them. Computer vision wasn't far enough along that it was all automated to read out what products were on the receipts. We had to use thousands of people around the world to do crowdsourced transcription of what was on the receipt. We had a small army of people training homegrown machine learning models to say, this little product code that says RDBLL means Red Bull. And then if it says RBLL 16Z, that means Red Bull 16 ounce, So the first time you see every variation and all the misspellings and everything, you've got to figure out how to code that as you train machine learning algorithms to do it. And so we're spending millions of dollars a year on this asset, and we just can't monetize it at that scale so quickly. And so it was always a balancing act of how much are we going to invest in building the panel and the data asset versus our ability to monetize it and manage our cash burn. Because at the end of the day, what we knew is if we could get enough clients using this data, the margins would be insane, right? Because you could get a fixed ongoing cost of operating that panel. But because it's syndicated data, we could sell it not 100 times over, but 1,000 times over. And so now you look at the margins of the business and wow, this looks like an outstanding business. But for the first 3-4 years, a lot of investors look at this business and say, oh man, you don't have 70% gross margins, or you're at 60 or 50 or whatever the percentage was in that year, and they weren't excited by it. And they couldn't look past the fact that look, we have to build a data asset at scale. We can lock it in and just keep monetizing it. And the revenue is going to go up, but our cost of the data and maintaining this data is not going to keep going up and up. And so this is actually it's a more beautiful business than most of your software businesses in terms of the scalability of the gross margins. But that was a tough sell.
Yes. Wow. That's so interesting, because now I think there's products that exist to de-encrypt all of those codes, right? Yeah. Like I've seen that in finance, I've seen it in transaction data, I've seen it in grocery data, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of machine learning applied to it now.
That's right.
As well.
That's right.
But you guys,
it didn't exist back then. In fact, we got the patents on basically deconstructing from a receipt image, what are the products on that receipt? Like the ability to then figure that out and map it to a real world product based on whatever short code is on a receipt. We got that patent. Nobody was doing that at the time.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk exit story and
yeah,
I guess the why, the real why, the external why, how your investors felt about it, and then the second exit that you just had. So let's,
sure.
Want to hear all of it.
So exit number one was an interesting one. Business was growing very nicely. I mean, I think we triple. We were on our doubling path, at that point. So we're going from like 12 to 24 million in revenue. Bookings are looking great. Net revenue retention is insanely high. So business is good. We're clearly monetizing the data, building a reputation. We're a hot company in the space. But we're still burning cash because we spend, $8-10 million a year on our panel asset. And so, when you're only generating 12 million in revenue, even though the bookings are looking great, you're still burning cash. We'd proven the sales model, all of those things were there, but we needed cash if we were going to keep growing at that kind of rate of continuing to double or more. And so I started looking at fundraising for a Series C. And as I was doing that, honestly, there wasn't a ton of interest in us. People couldn't get past the gross margins at the time, or just many other aspects of the business. And those that did, the kind of valuations we were looking at weren't great. And so one of the things I looked at is, well, maybe we raise a little bit less and we have a conversation with some of the strategics in the space. And so, we started talking to some companies that were broadly in this market research panel space about, a smaller fundraise to just allow us to keep growing and get a little closer to them anyway. And, very simply, one thing led to another, and the conversation started getting more and more strategic. And to keep our foot on the gas and keep growing, no matter what happened from those strategic conversations, I took some venture debt. Turned out to be one of the best moves I ever made as a CEO. Our investors didn't like it. Our executive team didn't like it. And it turned out fantastic at the end of the day because it preserved, the equity and ownership for all of the existing investors when an exit did come about 6 months later. Because what ended up happening is, all of a sudden we get one offer to be acquired. It's semi-interesting, but it allows us to bring in a banker and drive conversations with others. And the next thing you know, the whole thing snowballs and becomes quite a race. And what was so funny about it is we had actually had a signed letter of intent with a strategic acquirer, but they didn't continue on their end to move things forward the way they needed to, and so it expired. And the day after it expired, I met with Vista Equity Partners. And they moved so fast. They loved the business. They were already working on an acquisition in an adjacent space called Market Track that was much larger, but not growing, but very profitable. And they saw an opportunity to buy both of us together, put them together, and take all of the sales team, all of the existing client base, all of the existing data assets that it had, and all the profitability, and further deploy them to continuing to grow what was the InfoScout business. And so that's what we ended up doing is, cool. We put the two companies together, we formed Numerator, we changed the name of the company, and it's been a fantastic run. The company has just continued to grow and grow and grow, and is nicely profitable. And I think just a super healthy business as it scaled the way that we always knew it would. But honestly, we couldn't always convince everyone that that's what it was going to look like in the future.
Yeah, totally. And you stayed involved after this?
Yeah, so I stayed on another year as CEO of InfoScout, working to integrate with Market Track, and then basically, had the whole plan was my wife and kids were going to move back from Budapest over to the U.S. and I was going to continue to run the whole thing, and sometimes family plans get take priority, and so I stepped back as operating CEO and onto the board, but not a typical board member. I was very active in terms of product and strategy and working with sales and marketing and just way more involved than a board member, but less involved than a full-time executive. And so just stayed very close with the business, and the company has a very strong CEO now. Outside person was brought in to run it, Eric Belcher. He's done a great job. It's further built out a very strong executive team, and so continue to grow the business. And I think it got exciting enough that Bain and Kantar. So Bain had acquired Kantar, which is, now that Nielsen has split up, Kantar I think is the world's largest market research company, and very strong strategic fit with them. And so they pulled the trigger to pull Numerator into the fold with Kantar, and that deal closes here in a week, it looks like. So
great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Wow. Yeah. What a cool story.
It's been, it's kind of a little bit of a dream run from the standpoint of it was, that first year was brutal. It was incredibly taxing. I felt for the first 6 months that I'd made an enormous mistake to leave a great job and a great life behind. And now I've got, wife and kids living with the in-laws, thousands of miles away. I'm sleeping on my co-founder's couch and thinking I've made a huge mistake. And then, fortunately he helped us focus on what really mattered and got us an app out in the market that it started to get some traction and success. And once that started happening, and then we could raise some angel money, things started moving. Let's call it the flywheel started spinning, and we'd solved the chicken and egg problem.
Yeah.
And then it went.
You sure solved it. Wow. How?
Yeah. Instead of chickens and eggs, now it's unicorns and whatever unicorns give birth to.
Right. That's pretty good. Okay. So you just changed my perspective on the hardest things to get right. So I thought that it was data and culture, and now I'm adding a third thing, which is family. Seriously, it's really hard to get that right while building a company. So kudos to that.
It's taxing.
I do want to talk about the data and culture lessons learned, because I think I know the family lessons learned, with that build one that you can trust and rely on, I'm bad. But on the data and culture, anything that you think was something that you're very proud of, and also looking back, anything that you wish that you could impart on others so that they don't make that same mistake or those same mistakes.
So on the data side, we just had a thesis that a couple of things were really going to matter, where we could excel and be strong, and some areas where we were going to be weak relative to the incumbents weren't going to matter as much. And they were non-obvious to people who were already in the industry, and a lot of naysayers. And so, just by having this thesis and doubling down on it and saying, no, if we build the largest panel that captures the most data, by having the most sample size, we will answer questions that our competitors can't because they don't have enough sample to answer it. Boom. By building a very large panel, we'll have so much data flowing every day that if we can process it quickly instead of waiting a month to provide like perfectly summarized reports, if we can turn around the data the very next day, there will be demand for speed to insight that will differentiate us from the competition, and we will win based on speed to insight. True. And starting with smartphone app as the only way to access and become part of the panel was seen as a major negative for us in the beginning, because that's a biased sample of the US population back then. And we said, no, everybody's going to have a smartphone and we'll be able to build a much larger, much more representative panel than the legacy approach, And so there were just a few of these kind of theses that we had of actually, this is going to win at the end of the day. And we're going to focus everything we do on excelling at the things that we think are going to matter most. And the things that we're not going to be able to solve for as well. For example, Nielsen had people scanning barcodes. So every bit of data they got was tied to a UPC product code. They knew exactly what product it was. If you've ever looked at your shopping receipts, sometimes you're the one who just bought the product and you look at the receipt and you're like, what is that on my receipt? You have to figure out what that is. We were never going to get all the data down to the SKU level and tie it all back. And there were a lot of people who said, well, you can't, you're never going to be reliable and used if you can't match everything. And we basically said, well, hang on here. If you're a Nielsen client today and you run a report and you try and drill down, can you drill down to the product level? No, there's not enough sample size. So they can't be that important at the end of the day. And it turns out it wasn't, so it's just thinking these things through. There's probably, had I known first principles at the time, there were probably ways of applying them, but I didn't, so I brute forced it. But we got to the right place. So I think that was on the data, is just really having a strong understanding of what will generate value for the client, what will the client value, and how will you distinguish yourself with your approach to market in terms of delivering on that differentiated value.
Yep. that resonates with us.
And then culture, I'm particularly proud of. I think we built an amazing data asset that nobody else has, and it's showing for itself. It's the basis of the business. I mean, the reason the business is worth what it is the data asset, really. But I think we built an awesome culture. We had 5-star Glassdoor reviews at the time of our exit. We actually fired more people than left the company. But we did so, I think, in a very humane way. If somebody just wasn't working out, we just had the conversation with them, and we would encourage them to work to, we didn't think it was resolvable. We'd say, hey, we'd like you to take the next few weeks and find something that's a better fit for you. And they left on good terms because they weren't like forced out the door and without a job, hunting for a new job without a job, which is a terrible position to be in. And they felt treated like people. And all of their colleagues would of course figure out what was going on. And one, they saw we treated people kindly as people, but two, they also saw that this was the kind of company where we're going to have outstanding talent and much is going to be expected of you, and you're going to deliver or it's not going to work. If you're leaving your teammates hanging because you're not doing your part, that's not going to be tolerated inside of this company. And so what that means is players are like, oh yeah, like it's on. I'm going to work with great people. I can count on everybody I'm working with because if it's not working, it's going to get resolved. It's not just going to fester and become a continuous problem where I have to make up for somebody else's shortcomings. And so then like the amount of employee referrals, like we're getting top talent. They're like, oh, others, you gotta come in. Turned out to be great for us. And then the other thing I think is the values that we set. I would almost call it, you've heard the story of like culture eats strategy for breakfast or something like this. There's just different sayings on that. And I'm not sure I agree with it, but I do think we did something where culture was strategy to us. And what I mean by that is one of our core values was transparent to a fault. Mm-hmm. Nielsen was anything but transparent in terms of how they worked and operated, what they did to the data to try and make it representative, what it actually represented, that their own employees could go in and figure out what was going on in the data and have access to it and see the whole systems and flows and anything, how decisions were made, you name it. So by having this value of transparent to a fault and having it embodied through the organization in terms of anything that we could share with our employees, we would share. Anything our employees could have visibility to, they got visibility to. Anything that could be shared with the client, they could share with the client, even if it warts and all. Like, hey, we know ours is better, so it's okay to show the warts. It's going to build credibility at the end of the day because our clients know we're not hiding anything from them. And so actually this cultural value became a part of our strategy in how we competed. We competed on a basis of just clear and open transparency. And we did this across like a number of values. We had failure to try isn't fatal, but failure isn't fatal, but failure to try is, and so our competitors weren't innovating. They weren't trying new things. People didn't think that they could change an existing process because it had been that way for 100 years, and you had to keep the numbers the same and everything. We were like, no, we're gonna try and find better ways of doing things constantly. Let's try, and it's okay if we make some mistakes along the way. We're the new incumbent startup, like we're not the legacy provider, and so we're all entrepreneurs was another value we had, which is take ownership for things. Think about this as if it's your own business that you're trying to grow. Take ownership, take responsibility, take it personally, but know that you can make the decision to make a better outcome. Like nobody at Nielsen thinks that way. Like, the people on site for Nielsen representing Nielsen to a client, they don't think like that. They're doing a freaking job. Sure. Right. So I think for us, our culture was an embodiment of our strategy and how to see it get executed day in, day out in every single thing that employees do.
That's terrific. And that you remember your values today means that you embodied them A lot of people just write them for the website or for the employee handbook and then never practice them. But you have to drip those values into the organization and remind people that they will be measured on how they embody those values, not just on pure performance, but on, are they representing the company with those values? Are they instilling those values? Like I've seen ideas that you want to give praise publicly on Slack or wherever to people using like, hey, today so-and-so did this, which is transparent, transparency wins.
That's like, exactly right.
Yeah,
That's
and
exactly
that
right.
kind of thing.
I think we did that pretty well. Some of our executive team, our head of sales and our head of services, they would do an offsite with all of the sales and service personnel, which is half the company. We're in sales and kind of client services. You'd call it customer success in a lot of companies.
Yeah.
But at the offsites in the evening, like after the full day of activity, they would with drinks in hand, they would lead an epic fails competition. And they would always start and they would talk about something that they totally, completely screwed up. And they tell the story about it, and it was, these were work related. Like, I thought this, I did this. It's not what the client wanted. We hosed it. And we'd all have a good laugh about it. But because they embodied it, that meant other people could come forward and they could share their failures. And this was a part of embodying, failure isn't fatal. Failure to try is. And if our leaders can stand up and say, hey, I screwed up, and we can all laugh about it, but more importantly, learn about it, and everybody can share their learnings too, guess what? We don't make the same mistakes twice, right? We learn from those mistakes and we grow as a company, but we do so in a really safe and supportive way. And that was one of my favorite things about our culture. And, it wasn't coming from me or my co-founder. It was coming from members of our leadership team who put it into practice.
Man, that's so good. I'm stealing a lot of that. Thank you. Thank you. My wife worked at Citadel for 8 years, which is like an eternity in Citadel time frame. And she left on her own accord, but she hasn't been there for 6 years. She still talks about the culture today, and whatever they did there, is unbelievable. And that's the kind of culture that I want to build for everything that I do.
Yeah, I tell you, culture just makes such a difference in so many ways. It makes recruiting top talent easier. It makes retaining people so much easier. It makes implementing change so much easier. It just makes all of these hard things so much easier if you have a right culture. And in our case, we had a culture that was aligned to our strategy, and it just worked.
That's great, man. Really happy for you.
Thanks. Yeah.
Really happy for you. Okay, so what's the thing? This is the last question, and this is amazing. Thank you so much, Jared.
Pleasure.
I want to have these, as a sidebar. I want to have some one-on-ones together, just because I really enjoy connecting and want to share my story at some point. And
I'd love to. Yeah, I'd love to hear more and learn more.
It really comes down to the people that you work with, and I'm so enjoying working with you and getting to know you. So thank you. Last question for you is, because of your view on data and your unique position in the industry, what would you say is translatable across any industry and any business that you learned about having valuable data?
To any business or any data business?
Any business. So I think that all businesses will become alternative data consumers.
Yeah.
That's my thesis.
Yeah. Yes.
And so what does that actually mean about how companies, because a lot of people say data is the new oil. I disagree. A lot of people say data is sand. I somewhat agree, but I actually think that their data can be oil or it can be sand. I only want to invest in oil. And if I'm a company though, I'm glad you like that. If I'm a consumer of data, I need both, right? So I need the sand and the oil in order to operate like,
Yeah.
business, but the oil is I think where the alpha is. The sand is just beta. So
Yeah.
so what would you prescribe to any company about valuable data?
Well, I go back to how I got into data to begin with. So I was a business supply chain major out of undergrad, and I took a job with Intel in their supply chain, and I was tasked with things that would help measure performance of the supply chain and drive improvements, optimizations in the flow of goods, reductions in inventory, delivery performance. And to do any of that, we had to collect data to begin measuring, to begin diagnosing, to do other kind of things. And I couldn't believe how hard it was to pull data together across all these different systems to link it up in a way where we could make sense of what was going on in the business. And so that was my first touch of data. I fell in love working with it immediately, but I couldn't believe how difficult it was because the ERP systems weren't designed actually to support anything. It was just to manage basic transactional process flows. It had nothing to do with actually measuring and business performance, diagnosing issues, creating forecasts and optimizations and other things. And so I remember trying to convince the IT department at Intel, of all companies in the world, in 2000, the most valuable company on the planet at the time. It's building processors and memory. And we couldn't convince them to get budget to store data from our transactions beyond a couple of years because it would cost too much. And so, you've got to make fab construction decisions where you're going to spend a couple $1 billion and you got to look 7 years out in advance. And you can only use a couple years of historical data because that's all you're willing to store, and so it's no wonder there were billions of dollars of issues when the dot-com bust happened, because we couldn't even see and have visibility in terms of what was going on to manage the business, right? We had no context. We didn't have anything. So look, in terms of what does this mean in terms of any business, I would just say I can't think of a decision that's worth making in the business that can't be better informed with appropriate data and models to better inform it. And a lot of times, that's not just your own data at the right level of granularity with enough history, which are often challenges inside of companies, but often it's understanding how it relates to external events and patterns that are going on. So in some industries, it's as basic as weather and demographics, and in others, it's much, much richer data, a la real-time bidding, not just in terms of the ads that you bid on and won, but what was the other flow of all the other competing offers and transactions, and how that relates to what you should be bidding on and what you should learn in terms of the trends in the market if you're in the marketing ecosystem. And so I can't think of a decision that's worth making that can't be made better with appropriate data and models around it, and which means there's always an opportunity to leverage data more.
I think you hit on two things then. So I think that's amazing feedback, but the Intel example is so illuminating. One of our largest LPs is a systematic hedge fund, right? And they will tell everyone that their advice is just store all your data because you never know what it's worth and to whom it has value.
Right. Yeah.
So that's already awesome that you noticed that so early. Because that's what I prescribe to every company is like, look, you got to store what you're collecting. The second point that you bring up about data being informed, the interesting exceptions to those rules are breakthrough products. Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos would both probably say, don't ask your consumers what they want. You need to.
I agree.
You need to tell them what they want, and then you can use data to sell it. But data wouldn't have predicted that people wanted the iPhone or an Alexa, right? Because you go and poll a bunch of people and you say, hey, do you want this black cylinder device in your kitchen or in your room that's recording everything that you say? They would be like, no. But yeah, it became, a top seller. So I think that when what you're talking about is business decisions, you're absolutely right. That business trajectory, business decision can all be informed with data. Sometimes you need, qualitative insights
I agree with that.
Insights for product development.
I agree with that. But for example, I'm making an investment in an early stage company called Maker Sites right now, which is helping companies determine, let's say you're an apparel company and you have to decide what your lineup of clothing is going to be that you're going to both bring to market and really put some production and marketing muscle behind in the coming year. How do you decide? Okay, look, the initial creative here may not be driven by that much by data. You come up with a bunch of different creative options. But in terms of which ones you're actually going to put real marketing behind and production behind to get out into the retail environment, actually Maker Sites is adding a ton of value by finding data-driven ways to help these companies get early and quick feedback from the consumer base and internally to make data-driven decisions as to which products to double down on before they're even brought to market. And it's hugely valuable. So I agree with you in terms of following the data trends may not help you come up with the initial idea, but once you have an idea or a concept, very quickly testing it before you put real money behind it can be incredibly valuable. I think about like an Optimizely back in the day when it first came out, which is, okay, let's have 20 different ways of this landing page being configured in terms of what it says and what the buttons are and what the images are and how they're configured. Okay, that's very creative driven. Figuring out which one to actually run with, that's very data driven.
Very true. Very true. Creative and data really do work well together.
They work extremely well together. Yeah. They're complementary. They don't need to compete. They don't need to be.
Yeah,
in fact, I think they give more options for creatives to be creative because you don't have to be conservative and going, well, I know this one will work. I've got this great idea. I think it could work, but there's too much risk that it won't. And since we only get one chance at this to actually take it to market, let me only come up with this one safer version. Well, that sucks if you're a creative.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you rather come up with 5 totally different versions, including this totally outlandish one, let them all into the market a little bit, get the initial data back, and let the data decide? And maybe it is that outlandish one that really works best, right? But you'd never do it because it wasn't the safe bet. You didn't have the data to know that it was worth taking the risk.
Yeah, I dig it. I'm going to give you the shirt thumbs up.